The shells had stopped 40 minutes ago, but the ground hadn't gotten the message. It still shook, tiny aftershocks running through the mud like a pulse that wouldn't quit. Corporal Lee Duncan pressed his back against what used to be a stone wall and tried to breathe through his mouth. The air tasted like iron and wet chalk. September 1918. The Meuse-Argonne offensive was grinding through its third week, and Duncan's unit had been ordered to sweep a bombed-out German position near Fleury. Most of the structures were gone. Collapsed roofs, walls turned to gravel. The kind of destruction that made you forget buildings had ever stood there at all.
Keep moving, Duncan. We're not here to sightsee. Intel says there's a signals post in the north structure. Find it, tag it, and get back to the column before dark.
Duncan nodded, moved through the rubble with his rifle low, stepping over broken timber and shattered masonry. He wasn't looking for anything alive. Nobody was. You didn't search ruins expecting miracles. You searched them for intel, for salvage, for the grim arithmetic of war. But then he heard it. A sound so small it could have been his imagination. A whimper. Not human. Thin and reedy, like a reed instrument played by someone who'd never held one. Coming from underneath a collapsed timber beam. Duncan dropped to his knees, pulled away chunks of plaster and broken wood with his bare hands until his fingers bled at the cuticles. And there, in a shallow depression where the floor had buckled, 5 German Shepherd puppies. Eyes sealed shut, bodies trembling. Their mother lay beside them, gaunt and breathing in shallow, exhausted pulls. She must have whelped them during the bombardment. Right here, in the middle of all that noise and fire, she'd brought life into a place built for ending it. Duncan was 27 years old. He'd grown up in an orphanage in Oakland after his mother couldn't keep him. He knew what it meant to be small and unwanted in a world that wasn't paying attention. He looked at those puppies, blind, shaking, covered in plaster dust, and something locked into place behind his ribs. Not a decision exactly, more like a recognition. He kept 2, named them after a pair of French puppet characters the local children loved, Rin Tin Tin and Nénette. The rest he placed with soldiers in other units who developed the same soft spot that combat has a strange way of creating.
Duncan, you're out of your mind. We're fighting a war. You can't nursemaid a litter of German dogs through the Western Front. Command finds out, they'll have your stripes.
Duncan didn't argue. He just kept the puppies inside his coat at night and fed them with a makeshift bottle he'd rigged from a glove finger in a canteen. Nénette didn't make it. She caught distemper somewhere between the Argonne and the Armistice. Duncan buried her near a farmhouse outside Toul and didn't talk about it. But Rin Tin Tin, Rinty, as Duncan started calling him, that dog held on like he'd made a private deal with the universe. By the time the war ended in November, Rinty was 2 months old and already doing things no puppy his age should have been able to do. Jumping obstacles, responding to hand signals, watching Duncan's face with an intensity that made other soldiers uncomfortable. The army offered to leave the dog in France. Standard protocol. Animals didn't ship home with troops. Duncan refused. He pulled favors, traded cigarette rations, and eventually smuggled Rinty aboard the USS Huron in a duffel bag lined with his spare uniform. The dog never made a sound during the entire crossing, as if he understood the stakes.
You know something, Duncan? You're either the most stubborn man in this army or the dumbest. Probably both. But that dog trusts you more than any soldier I've seen trust their CO. So maybe you earned it.
They landed in New York in the spring of 1919. A soldier and a dog, stepping off a gangway into a country that had no idea what was coming. Because Rin Tin Tin wasn't just a war souvenir. He was about to become something Hollywood had never seen. and something that would save a studio from collapse. But that story starts in a dusty backyard in Los Angeles, where a young corporal taught a German shepherd to jump higher than anyone thought possible. Los Angeles in 1922 was a city still figuring out what it wanted to be. Orange groves butted up against construction sites. Dirt roads turned to asphalt mid-block. And the movie business, if you could call it a business, operated out of converted barns and empty lots where the light was good and the rent was cheap. Duncan had settled into a small bungalow off Vine Street, working odd jobs and spending every free hour training Rinty. Not parlor tricks, not shake and roll over. He was training this dog the way you train an athlete. Repetition, precision, hours of the same movement until it lived in the animal's muscles like memory. Rinty could clear a 6-foot fence from a standing start. He could open a latch with his teeth, climb a ladder, drag a man across a room by the sleeve. Duncan had built a course in his backyard, ramps, walls, tunnels, and the neighbors would gather along the fence line just to watch. But Hollywood wasn't interested. Duncan took Rinty to every studio in town, and the answer was always a variation of the same word: no. Dogs don't sell tickets, pal. People want romance, not animals. Come back when you've got a trained bear. At least that's a novelty.
Wait, do that again. The fence thing, have him do that again. And the ladder, can he do both in sequence without you repeating the command?
Duncan's break came sideways, the way most real breaks do. A dog show at the Ambassador Hotel. He'd entered Rinty on a whim, and the dog performed so precisely that a reporter from the Los Angeles Times wrote a small piece about it. That article landed on the desk of a young screenwriter at Warner Brothers named Darryl Zanuck. Zanuck was 20 years old and hungry in the way that only people with nothing to lose can be. Warner Brothers was hemorrhaging money. The studio had been founded just 5 years earlier by 4 brothers from Youngstown, Ohio, and by 1923 they were one bad quarter from shuttering the whole operation. Zanuck drove out to Duncan's bungalow on a Tuesday afternoon. He watched Rinty run the backyard course 3 times without a single command repeated. The dog hit every mark, cleared every obstacle, and finished each run by sitting at Duncan's feet and looking up. Not for a treat, but for approval.
Jack, listen to me. Low budget, adventure picture, dog as the lead, minimal human cast, outdoor locations that cost us next to nothing. If it tanks, we barely feel it. If it hits, and I'm telling you, this dog is something nobody's ever seen, we buy ourselves another year.
Jack Warner said yes, but not because he believed in the dog. He said yes because he was desperate. When you're drowning, you'll grab anything that floats, even if it's got 4 legs and sheds on the furniture. Filming started in the spring of 1923, on location in the Sierra Nevada mountains. And from the first day of shooting, something became obvious to everyone on set. This dog wasn't just trained, he was performing. Rinty would wait for his mark, hit it on the first take, and hold his position until the director called cut. Camera operators started requesting him by name. Get the dog, he's better than the actors. Where the North Begins premiered in June of 1923. It made $320,000 against a budget of barely $40,000. Lines wrapped around the block at theaters in New York, Chicago, and San Francisco. Audiences didn't just watch Rinty, they cheered for him, gasped when he was in danger, clapped when he triumphed. Nobody had ever seen a reaction like that for an animal. Warner Brothers didn't just survive that year, they thrived. And every executive who turned Duncan away suddenly had the same question on their lips.
Funny how that works, isn't it? 6 months ago, they wouldn't return my calls. Now they're sending flowers to Duncan's house. and asking when we can get the dog back for another picture. Hollywood doesn't have a memory, it has a cash register.
Between 1923 and 1932, Rin Tin Tin starred in 27 feature films for Warner Brothers. 27. Most human actors of that era were lucky to get 5. He earned roughly $6,000 a week, more than most of the directors who pointed cameras at him, and he received over 10,000 fan letters a month. Someone at the studio had to hire a secretary just to manage his correspondence. Fans sent bones, homemade treats, hand-knitted sweaters. Children drew pictures of him in crayon and mailed them with notes that said things like, "Dear Rinty, you are my best friend even though we never met."
Here's something most film histories bury in the footnotes. The money Rinty generated helped finance The Jazz Singer in 1927, the first feature-length talking picture. The film that killed the silent era and birthed modern cinema was bankrolled, in part, by a German shepherd who'd been pulled from a bombed-out kennel 9 years earlier. Let that settle for a second.
The films were formulaic by design. Rinty plays a loyal dog who saves his owner from danger, fights off villains, and emerges triumphant. The plots blurred together, but the audiences never blurred. Every premiere packed theaters. Every opening weekend broke records for the studio. Warner Brothers didn't just use Rin Tin Tin to stay afloat. They used his profits to fund the technology that would change cinema forever. But fame is a machine with teeth, and it doesn't care if you walk on 2 legs or 4. Rinty's schedule was brutal. 5, sometimes 6 films a year. Long days on set. Stunts that would have broken a lesser animal. Duncan was there for every take, every setup, every retake, but even he couldn't stop the wear. By 1929, Rinty was 11 years old. In German Shepherd years, that's ancient. His muzzle had gone gray. He moved a half step slower on the obstacle courses. The camera operators, who'd spent years filming him in perfect motion, started adjusting their angles, shooting tighter, closer, hiding the stiffness in his hind legs that showed up when the temperature dropped. Duncan noticed it first, the way you always notice decline in someone you love before anyone else does. A slight hesitation before a jump, a longer pause between takes. Rinty would look at Duncan with those dark, steady eyes, the same eyes that had locked onto him in that ruined kennel. And Duncan would scratch behind his ears and whisper words only the 2 of them could hear. The talkies posed another problem. Silent films had been Rinty's medium. Pure physicality, pure expression, no dialogue required. Sound changed everything. Audiences wanted to hear their stars speak, and a dog couldn't deliver lines. Warner Brothers quietly reduced Rinty's contract. Fewer films, smaller budgets. The machine was already looking for the next thing.
That's the cruelty of the entertainment industry, isn't it? It doesn't retire its heroes, it replaces them. One season you're the biggest draw in the country. The next, you're a line item someone's trying to cut from a budget meeting. And you don't get a say in any of it.
Duncan moved Rinty to a smaller studio for his final films. The budget shrank, the audiences thinned. But Duncan didn't care about any of that. He'd never been in this for the money or the fame. He was in it because of a promise he'd made on a battlefield in France. A promise to a trembling puppy that he'd never be abandoned. And he kept that promise every single day. Rinty's last film was Tough Guy in 1932. It wasn't a hit. Most people don't even remember it. But if you watch the final scene, really watch it, you'll see a 13-year-old dog performing with the same focus, the same intelligence, the same absolute commitment he'd shown since his very first take. He didn't know how to do anything less. August 10th, 1932. A warm evening in Los Angeles. The kind of night where the Santa Ana winds carry the smell of jasmine through open windows, and the city feels softer than it has any right to. Rin Tin Tin died at home, on the floor of Lee Duncan's living room. He was 14 years old. Duncan was holding him when he went, one hand on the dog's chest, feeling the heartbeat slow, then stutter, then stop. The same hands that had pulled him from rubble 14 years earlier. The story goes that Duncan's neighbor, a young actress named Jean Harlow, heard him crying through the open window and came over to sit with him. She didn't say anything, just sat on the floor beside him while he held his dog and let the grief come in waves. The next morning, newspapers across America ran the story on their front pages. Not buried in the back with the pet columns and the funny pages. The front page. Rin Tin Tin, screen's greatest animal actor, dies. Radio stations interrupted their programming. Theaters dimmed their marquee lights. Duncan buried Rinty in the backyard of their bungalow. Later, the dog's remains were moved to the Cimetière des Chiens in Agnières-sur-Seine, France, the world's oldest pet cemetery, just outside Paris. A war dog born in France, who lived his life in America, returned to French soil in death. There's a symmetry to that so clean it almost hurts. The numbers don't capture what Rin Tin Tin meant. 27 films, millions of dollars in revenue, a studio rescued from bankruptcy, the financing of the technology that created modern talkies, a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, one of the few given to a non-human performer.
There's a legend, unconfirmed but widely repeated, that Rin Tin Tin received the most votes for Best Actor at the very first Academy Awards in 1929, but the Academy decided a dog winning their top prize would undermine the prestige of the new ceremony. They gave it to Emil Jannings instead. Whether it's true or not, the fact that people believe it tells you everything about how that dog was perceived.
Duncan spent the rest of his life breeding and training Rinty's descendants, maintaining the bloodline with the care of someone tending a sacred flame. Rin Tin Tin II, Rin Tin Tin III, the fourth, each one carrying the name forward like an inheritance too valuable to let go.
People ask what made Rinty different from every other trained dog in Hollywood. And the answer isn't the training, though Duncan's methods were ahead of their time. It isn't the physicality, though Rinty could do things on camera that looked impossible. The difference was Duncan himself. A man who'd been abandoned understood at the bone level what loyalty meant. And he built a dog who embodied that understanding so completely that millions of strangers felt it through a screen.
Lee Duncan died in 1960, 28 years after Rinty. He'd never married, never had children. His whole life was organized around one principle, the bond he'd formed in a bombed-out kennel in Lorraine. Some people called that obsessive. Some called it lonely. I'd call it faithful. In the truest, most uncompromising sense of the word. He found something in the wreckage of a war, and he spent his entire life honoring it. Not for money, not for fame, for the simple, devastating reason that it mattered. And Rinty? A stray born in a battlefield. A refugee smuggled across an ocean. A performer who saved a studio, financed a revolution in cinema, and proved, before anyone thought to ask the question, that loyalty doesn't need language. It just needs presence. Consistent, unwavering, absolute presence. That's the story of Rin Tin Tin. Not a pet, not a prop, a soldier's promise, kept in fur and bone in those steady knowing eyes, all the way to the end, and then some.